and welcome to another Huddle Breakdown Extra Time. I'm your host Martin Murphy and joined as ever by Alan and by James. Great to see you guys. How are you?
Doing well for a change. How about you, Alan?
Yeah, all right. Busy day today. We've been recording a special, which we'll tell you all about next week. Lots happening as we've been hinting at, and hopefully you've been seeing.
Yeah, so I watched the Tuesday show that came out on Wednesday morning. Really interesting as ever. The show with Laura and yourselves looking at the Kilmarnock match. Alan, did you have anything to add to that? Any further thoughts before we move on?
No, not really. Yeah, I wanted to get into the spirit. We're going to start with a poem. Poem corner has come early in the show. We're going to peak early. Not to say that Martin may not have a surprise up his sleeve for later, but
the show may be bookended by poetry. Who knows? Listen to the end.
Absolutely. I'm just so inspired by Derek McInnes that I found something which is actually from a sort of kind of one of these funeral eulogy type poems. This is for Derek, and it's really and it's a rare occasion where I'm actually first time ever, probably last time ever, speaking on behalf of the Celtic support. So imagine I'm speaking to Derek on behalf of the Celtic support. Just close your eyes and you will see all the memories that you have of me. Just sit and relax and you will find I'm really still there inside your mind. Keep dreaming of Celtic, Derek.
I love that. I'm sure he will. Yes, I did enjoy his reactions after the match, I have to say. So an international break, guys. Never my favourite thing. Did allow me some time to catch up in some of the European opposition that will be coming up against later on, in December, January, later this month, and so forth as well. But obviously a bit less to talk about in the Celtic point of view, but I did look at the situation with our centre forwards where Idah unfortunately picked up an injury after being buffeted at Fir Park and then at the aptly named Rugby Park, and so about 4-minute nosebleed I think he had there, so obviously in a bit of discomfort, the poor guy, in an ankle injury at Fir Park, and Kyogo miraculously after 13 months being chosen by the manager of Japan at last. I suppose, Alan, if I could come to you first of all about Kyogo, is there anything that's maybe changed in the last 13 months in terms of the way Kyogo's performed that may have encouraged the international manager to choose him for Japan?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, because I think that is maybe even out, possibly out of kilter with what some fans' perception might be, because, we've seen Kuhn at the top of the scoring contribution charts. We see Idah up there, and Kyogo's tucked in as well. The front three as a unit have been incredibly productive, but Kuhn he's almost double the number of goals and assists of the other two, and we're used to kind of Kyogo really being at the top of the scoring charts, and so I think he's got, I can't remember how many goals he's got now. Actually, I should know that off the top of my head. But if you actually look at his goals per game, he's what is he now? He's at 0.53, right? So 0.53 goals per game now. But that's the goal every other game, right? So that's not a problem. That's good. Given that he tends to start games but not finish them, meaning he's usually up against defences when they're at their best. He's not a closer that comes on for the last 15 minutes and maybe gets some easy goals when teams are tiring or kind of already defeated, right? So it's a point I would always make about Kyogo. He does the hard yards as far as centre-forward play for Celtic in the main. And is actually that goal rate of 0.53 goals is actually a little bit higher than last season. Last season it was 0.51. But I think maybe where some of the issue is that if you look at his first two seasons for Celtic, his first season he was scoring at a rate of 0.83 goals per game. And in his second season, he was scoring at nearly a goal a game, 0.95 goals per game. So on that basis, you can argue, well, He's almost halved his goal scoring rate over the last 2 seasons. Is that an issue? Are we seeing a decline in him? So this is why I really wanted to look at Kyogo. So I just want to kind of canter through some of his numbers, really, just to sort of put into context how he's doing this season. So another thing that we talk about with Kyogo is just his general involvement in the game. Now, I kind of measure that by simple event data in terms of how many sort of touches of the ball, how many possession events, I rather grandiosely call them. So how many interactions with the ball does he actually have? And at the moment, this season, it's just over 16. Now that doesn't sound like a lot, and it isn't. I mean, it's very low. And and we might get onto the subject when James chimes in, I think, about the role of centre forwards dropping deep, getting involved in build-up. Well, 16 possession events per game for Kyogo, but that's actually his second lowest that he's ever had at Celtic. His lowest was actually the second season under Ange, when it went down to 15.74, and his most was actually in his first season, where it was just over 27. I mean, he only averages at the moment completing just over 6 passes in a game, which is incredibly low number. But it's less than he was last season. It was 7.8. So he's actually getting involved in the game in general senses less than he was last season. So although we might see him, and it can be eye-catching when he drops deep, it doesn't happen very often, and therefore we probably remember it. But it is actually quite a rare event in the grand scheme of things. One of the things he's actually doing a little bit more than he used to do is actually running with the ball. Now that, again, was counterintuitive to me, because he's getting near 28, 29 years old now. So having more runs with the ball, more dribbles, if you like, is not something you normally associate with a player getting older, but he's probably running with the ball 50% more than he was. And that's from a low base, right? We're not talking about huge numbers here. Really encouragingly, he's actually getting more touches in the box this season than he ever has. Right, so last season it was just under 4. The season before it was around 4, and in his first season it was 4.7. He's 5.13, so he's getting more touches in the box this season, as I say, than he ever has, and he's actually getting more shots on target than he ever has, 1.86. And he's getting more shots in the box, 3.27. Last season it was 2.59. So not big increases, but quite big percentage increases, again, from quite a low base. He's also taking more shots from outside the box as well, funnily enough. So just getting more shots away in general, which again may be counterintuitive, because people think, well, he's not scored as many goals as he normally does, but he's actually getting into great positions, getting more shots off, and actually getting more big chances. So again, a big chance is something which is when the ball comes to you, and there's probably none or maybe one at most defenders between you and the goal. Maybe it's like a one-on-one with a goalkeeper, or you're a very short distance from goal. So a big chance is one where you think, yeah, you probably should score there. So they're good things to get into position for. Again, this season he's getting more big chances than he's ever had in a Celtic shirt over the previous seasons. Now, where he is perhaps not getting as involved is he's not making as many key passes. So he's not setting up as many chances for other. It's 0.71, which is higher than it was in Ange's second season, but lower than it was in the 2 other seasons. And therefore his total expected assists is 0.22, which is respectable, but a bit short of the 0.31 it was in his first season at Celtic. But overall, then, even though his scoring contribution is 0.97, which is actually, so this is goals plus assists, the scoring contribution 0.97, that's one goal or assist per game. For his first season, it was bang on 1. In the second season, it was 1.09. Last season, it plummeted to 0.67. This season, it's back to 0.97. So this is in general, a remarkable, the consistent Kyogo that we get, and second of all, he's actually producing at a rate commensurate with his, what we might think of as his golden seasons under Ange. And if we look at the expected scoring contribution, his expected scoring contribution is over 1. It's 1.02. It's the highest expected scoring contribution he's ever had in a Celtic shirt. I think that will probably surprise people. It surprised me, right? So I have an aggregated metric called Celtic attacking threat score, CAT score, I call it, right? And it kind of and it's an aggregate, so it's a dumb volume count. It's not like a quality count, it's a volume count. Expected scoring contribution is a quality count, it's the highest it's been. And cat score is a volume count. And again, it's the highest it's ever been. It's 8.13, whereas the previously last season it was 6.3. So that's quite a big jump. What he is doing less of is he's less through balls, less line breaking passes. His pack passing is almost half what it was this season. But encouragingly, his receiving pack score, so this is him being on the end of balls that people put through the lines, is actually the highest it's ever been. Now that astonished me, because when I set up to write this, and I will write this piece up tomorrow and put it on the huddlebreakdown.com, my expectation was this was going to be a bit of a sorry tale, and what my punchline was going to be was Kyogo really misses Matt O'Reilly, because Kyogo and O'Reilly had a wonderful understanding, and O'Reilly set up so many chances for Kyogo. But actually, he's on the end of more forward passes this season than he's ever been. And that's even with our sort of misfiring midfield as regards line-breaking passes. So, and his total packing score is in line with his best ever season. It's 59. His best ever was 60. So not much to say there. The one thing that has declined, absolutely has declined, is he's getting much less involved in defensive activities. Defensive success rate, defensive metrics are pretty much quite well down on his Ange seasons, but they're slightly up on last season. So more shots. He's actually, for the first time, he's, and I think this comes back to the start. I expected this to be a bit of a sad story, and why is Kyogo? Is he struggling? He's missing Matt O'Reilly. What's going wrong? But actually, it's not that. It comes down to one thing, and one thing only, is that he's massively underperforming his expected goals. It's that simple thing. It's all to do with perception. He's 0.27, so nearly more than a quarter of a goal per game. So every fourth game, he's a goal down on where he should be by his expected goals. But in his first two seasons, he overperformed his expected goals by 0.16 a game. Last season, he was underperforming it very slightly. But this season, he's massively underperforming his expected goals, even though his expected goals per shot, 0.20, is pretty respectable. And so, consequently, is his shooting accuracy stats. So, for example, what people don't realise is probably how unsustainable his conversion rate had been in his early seasons. In his second season, he was actually he's scoring from 64% of the shots he got on target. I mean, that's just insane. This season, that's dropped to 29, which is by miles the lowest it's ever been. So that could be a combination of he's just met some great goalkeepers that have made some great saves. Maybe his finishing's being just a little bit off as well. And then on all shot conversion for his first two seasons, so for 2 whole seasons, he maintained a conversion rate of 30% of every shot he took was going in the back of the net. That's just crazy, right? It fell down to 16% last season, which I would say is kind of average, right? I mean, 18-19 would be really good.
Is that known as the Lawrence Shankland effect?
Yeah, probably, yeah. But this season it's down at 13%. So, his conversion rate's the lowest. So maybe there's a bit of bad luck, a bit of good goalkeeping, maybe a smidgen of bad finishing as well. But I think that massively drives the perception about his whole performance, which, as we've seen, is actually commensurate with some of his best seasons at Celtic. So finally, he's scoring his scoring contributions. He's scoring at the rate of one scoring contribution every 93 minutes. Last season, that was 134 minutes. And he's scoring at the rate of 17 possessions. He has to have every 17 times he touches the ball, he scores a goal. Last season, that was 28. So, is there anything wrong with Kyogo? Not really. And actually, to your original question, the Japan manager must be really smart. He must be really looking at the data to think, well, he's not scoring a lot of goals, but if you look at his underlying metrics, they're pretty good. So I wouldn't worry about Kyogo. I think a bit of fortunate finishing, a couple going in off his backside, a couple of goalkeeper howlers, and suddenly I think any perceptions that people may have that he's not having a great season, I think will change.
It's really a couple of really interesting things I'd love to pick up on, if you don't mind, please, Alan. When you mentioned the Japan manager, one of the things that he kept throwing back towards Kyogo was that the Japan players had a knowledge of their way of playing. It was pretty much saying they were team players, they knew the system, and I felt there was a bit of an inference that he didn't see Kyogo that way. Do you feel that the way that Kyogo has played in the Brendan Rodgers system has convinced him that he is indeed a team player in terms of the way he's been performing?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any notion or not had any chatter or anything really that would infer anything other than he's a model professional. And,
Yeah.
I hate to sort of generalize along racial lines, but Japanese players culturally do have a reputation for being absolutely committed to the team. It's team before individual. That's why probably Ryo Hatate is a little bit different. I mean, that was one of the things I read about him when he was in Japan, is that even amongst those in the dressing room in the clubs he was at there, they saw him as being a little bit different. He's a little bit more individualistic than the norm. We think of, Daiz and Maeda. There's nothing Daiz and Maeda wouldn't do for the team. And I don't get any sense that Kyogo is any different. I mean, I have my big perception bias with Kyogo is the number of times he drops short and he gives a first time pass and it just goes to nobody. Now, if you look at the data, that doesn't happen very often. He just simply doesn't do that very often. But it sticks in my mind, and I get really annoyed with it. Yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. So there might be a little. Everyone's got these little things that annoy you about certain players. But actually, when you stand back and look at it and analyze it, it's not something that happens very often. It's just something that triggers me. So maybe as far as the Japan manager is concerned, there might be some element of that. I think if you look at the way that Japan play, and actually it's Maeda that he prefers as a centre forward, and I have a problem with that. I think Maeda's a terrific centre forward. But Maeda has got a set of skills that, even from a pressing perspective, are probably a bit higher end than Kyogo's. It's maybe that element that he goes for.
And interesting as well what you said there about Maeda through the middle, because Japan have often used Kyogo on the left-hand side, as opposed to through the middle. So they may see him in a different role, although he has played right across, to a lesser extent, the right wing, more to the left wing, and through the middle. Final thing, really, from me again, to pick up on what you were saying, I thought really interesting. You mentioned Matt O'Reilly, and obviously delighted to see Matt coming back for Brighton and scoring form again in a big match. Absolutely delighted for him. Do you feel that Kyogo has actually benefited in some ways from... I know it sounds crazy, it's like, well, Matt Riley was holding him back, sort of thing, but yeah, Matt Riley, but this idea that maybe there was so much pressure on Matt Riley, get the ball to him, etc. Is the ball coming from a lot, in many more positions now, and actually, more people are taking the responsibility to bring Kyogo into the game?
So I think you raise a great point, and I'll be honest, I've not looked at that particular. I'd run out of time. I did want to look at who's creating chances for Kyogo in lieu of O'Reilly not doing that, because they did have an incredible. There's been probably, in the time I've been doing this data stuff, there's probably been two relationships that have been statistically significant outliers. One is Rogic and Forrest, who I believe were really good pals off the pitch as well, and the second is Kyogo and O'Reilly in terms of. And I'm saying that what I mean by that is volume of pack passes between them and XG and expected assists, chances being created by one for the other, using those two kind of metrics. But the interesting point that you raise, even wider than that question, that I want to dig into, and I think James is modelling head on and attribution modelling head on, especially. I think this is one that I'll throw open, really, not necessarily for an answer, but to start thinking about is, we keep complaining about, Engels, Bernardo, even Hatate, if he's not having a good day. There's just not the volume of passes from midfield. We're not seeing those through balls. We're not seeing that creative passing from midfield that we did. We had O'Reilly, we had Moy, especially, and a younger Callum McGregor, right? And it's like, because we're not getting that, then that's a bad thing. But if the team is winning 6-0 and it's not getting beaten, and it's beating Leipzig in the Champions League, and it looks like it's working efficiently, does it matter? If threat is coming from other areas, like you imply, does it matter that it's not coming from those other midfielders, providing they're doing something else that helps the team? A question. I don't know the answer to that. That's something I think I need to dig into. But I think your question triggered that question in my mind as a piece of analysis that needs to be done. I just immediately go, pack passing's down, bad. That's not a good thing, right? Really makes me unhappy. But actually, is it? Does it really matter if the team as a whole are functioning? And maybe actually the centre backs are breaking breaking lines more, which they are. And maybe that's by design. I don't know. Right. So all questions, all good questions, but for future, I think to look into.
Super. If I can come to you now, please, James. I know that you'll be alluding to Kyogo as well during this, but I'd mentioned at the start about Idah. I was going to come to you about Adam's contribution this season. As Alan mentioned from the start, Kyogo doing a lot of the hard yards, and it's been rare for Adam to come on and start a match. How do you feel that he's started the season?
Not great. I think and again, in fairness to him, you set this question up in a way that's charitable, and I think fairly so, meaning that it's not as if he's had consistent game time, long stretches of playing. So that's important context to how he's been playing. I think what has happened is some of the positive variance that I documented and shared about his run last season has swung the other direction. And what occurred when everyone was rightfully celebrating his goals last season was that opposition keepers were gifting him some of those. And that has not been occurring to the same extent this season. So he's actually not performed that much different last season versus this season. The difference has been his conversion rate, to Alan's point. And to touch upon one aspect of the Kyogo equation, because Alan mentioned it, a small chunk of it with Kyogo, his conversion rate down, does appear to be his finishing slipped a little bit. Not a ton, but enough to be material. But its opposition keepers have done a much better job against him. Again, just very good raw variance. The same that Butland gifted a couple of goals to Idah last season. Now there's a couple of guys that made some brilliant saves against Kyogo when he actually put a good shot on target. So when you're talking about relatively small sample sizes, one or two of these things change the entire of way that these numbers fall and come out. So I think my concern with Idah is this goes back to recruitment. I think he's being asked to do something that he's not very good at. I think he's been he's like an actor that's been miscast in a movie or a show. And I don't think at least this is the weight of the evidence. And again, this goes back to the benchmarking exercise I did when we signed him, and now we don't have a huge amount of data sample, but it's material in the sense that it correlates with the body of evidence prior to him arriving at Celtic, and it's basically when he's on the ball and it's not in the final third. This is my nerd way of phrasing this. It's a negative expected value event, meaning that on average, when he touches the ball, whether he's going to be passing it or turning and then trying to progress the ball, carrying it, between let's say the middle third to the final third, on average, it turns out bad, meaning that more bad than good. So it's not a universal thing, obviously. Obviously, there's times when he brings the ball down and does a brilliant pass and it helps progress build up. But even within the context of, as Alan intimated at, I'm not a big fan. Generally, my analysis and research is starting to point me towards that this is not a good style of play generally, is that he's been poor within that context. And the problem with that, and this is why I think it's unfair to him, so Alan was talking about how little Kyogo's involved in build-up still, and that has persisted since the Ange Ball era. And I think Rodgers and the management team and the coaching staff deserve credit for sticking with what works, because there was a little bit of teetering with that early in his tenure, because Kyogo was starting to drop deeper more, and then I think they reverted back to what was, if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of thing. If you look at Idah's touches, Idah's passing rate, Idah's carrying rate, they're all more than double Kyogo. So he is dropping deep and getting involved in buildup in a way that Rodgers historically has used as strikers, like Dembele, for example. But he's not good at it. So, you're taking someone who is not particularly good in a role and having them do a role that's ramping up. Like, I think if you move Kyogo into this role, he would do better than Idah is, despite the narrative about his height, which is obvious. But his height's not helping him. He's not, if he's flicking on headers to the center backs on the other team, he's not using that height in mass to facilitate buildup. I think if he was redirected, because actually his decision making has been pretty good around the box. He does seem to have a penchant for being able to spot a teammate and get them the ball in the final third. In that, when he's squared up facing the goal, he's shown some ability to do that, and he's clearly a tremendous athlete. So I think if he was actually put in a role similar to Kyogo, it would behoove him significantly. And I think he has a lot of, like Giakoumakis was to a large degree. Giakoumakis was that. So supposedly this guy who was supposed to drop deep and help build up, he was terrible at it too. But when he was kind of restricted to that Kyogo Ange ball striker role, he thrived because he was finishing chances inside 12 yards, and he was, doing very well. So that's kind of, this whole idea that we need a different striker and a change up striker. Even if I conceded that, and I won't, because I don't think it's a good idea in general, but if that is a priority, you need a striker that's really good at it. And I don't think we have that. And like I said, I think Kyogo is actually better at that role too, and that's because he's better on the ball. He's better at turning. He's, to Alan's point, like this goes to his expected value on that build-up play is about neutral, right? And that ranks him pretty high amongst strikers, whereas Idah's is like really negative. I don't have access to the same data, but Guirassy at Dortmund, for example, I would expect him, if there's going to be the type of striker that actually has a positive expected value on that kind of play, it would be somebody like him, because he's a freak in a positive way. So yeah, I think there's a bit of unfairness of what's being asked of him, and coming on mostly as a sub and then playing in a style of play that probably doesn't highlight his strengths. I think it's a rough ask.
Again, some really interesting points, and I did hark back to one of our early discussions, as you alluded to there, over the summer, looking at just before we signed Adam Idah, a lot of that came to mind. I suppose one thing that strikes me, James, do you see the positives? Rodgers, for example, against Kilmarnock was possibly looking at Idah, thinking, right, well, this is a big team we're going up against. Even defensively, that's a big threat that they pose, in terms of crosses, long throws, all these sorts of things. Having a big unit like Adam Idah defensively is good. He's robust. And at the other side of the pitch, Kyogo's more likely to get buffeted by these hammer throwers, maybe having that physical presence.
Maybe get a broken nose.
The big guy get buffeted, yeah. They would have murdered Kyogo, can you imagine? He would never have survived if it started. But do you see the value of that, or do you still believe that, the way Celtic are playing and asking their centre forwards to play is not really likely to cut it, or do you think there's still so much development in him as Rodgers probably does?
I agree with all of that to a degree, meaning that so I actually said heading into the game that I was fine with a rotate. Again, we can't play Kyogo every game, especially with this stretch of the season. He's got a chronic long-term shoulder injury that needs to be managed. He's already suffered a severed hamstring tendon, most likely, given how long he was out. He's 29 years old, as Alan said. So his minutes should be managed. So that was a game to rotate. I thought it made a lot of sense because it was going to be what it turned into, which was like a combination of rugby and ping pong. His as difficult as controlling the ball is on that carpet, you saw him, Idah, that is, really struggle with controlling the ball and acting in a positive sense within what were very difficult conditions. But that's what happens when you get stress tested at something you're not that great at. You look really bad at it. So I don't blame him for that. And I'm actually okay because, to your point, one of the primary threats they were going to have against us was set pieces. And, in a game where it's sheer chaos, it doesn't hurt to have a bigger guy that participate in the chaos. That's kind of been my view when we go to Rugby Park. Generally speaking, the vast majority of the time, with the way that we play, I see Kyogo as a significantly better player, a better fit, and that all other things being equal, meaning that he's fit and he doesn't need to be rotated and he can play his full 60, 65, 70 minutes as the starter, then I would, prefer. I don't think Man City, if that rumor is to believe, was going to spend $20 million on Adam Idah. And I think there's a reason for that, is because Kyogo is a significantly superior player.
I think move him on. He's got a dodgy shoulder. It'll take at least 4 months for him to recover from an operation on that. I joke, of course. Alan, if you'd like to come in, please give your views.
Well, yeah, very quickly on Idah, a couple of things. One thing very quickly is that his expected scoring contributions, that's expected goals plus expected assists, is about 0.8, and his actual scoring contribution is just 0.8. So he's actually, and they're both good numbers. So I know that's simplistic, right? But the second thing I just wanted to touch on was that game against Kilmarnock. And I think, when I watched it, I was getting very frustrated at Idah because the ball seemed to be, perception-wise, just bouncing off him and going nowhere. But actually, when I watched it back, I started to feel really sorry for him. And the reason I felt sorry for him was, yes, there were one or two occasions when he miscontrolled the ball. But actually, Celtic were making it a strategy to play through the lines, whether it be Schmeichel or the centre-backs or whoever, to get the ball to Idah and for Idah to drop. What then should have happened in the man-to-man system is that midfielders should have been running off him, and they very rarely did. So to me, it was a failure of Engels, Hatate, maybe even McGregor, just weren't running off him as he received the ball. They should have been on the go, so he could just lay it off to the side, and it very rarely happened. So I felt sorry for him because I think he was doing his job. He was following instructions, but I don't think he was getting the support from the others that he should have done. So that was just a little by the by on the Kilmarnock game.
I thought, again, really, really interesting views there, Alan. And to kind of link something that you mentioned earlier about Kyogo and ask James's view on this in terms of Adam Idah. Alan had mentioned how Kyogo wasn't doing as much defensively and maybe tracking back and doing so much. What's your views, James, on Adam Idah's role? Do you feel that he's making a good contribution to the team as such, working back, getting the ball defensively and helping others, maybe creating space for other players to play and creating openings further up the field?
Yeah, so the obvious distinguisher is aerially, which is that's the common sense one. So he does make a material difference in winning aerial duels that Kyogo is just, from a physicality perspective, almost non-competitive. Him and Hatate are so small that, if it's them and another person in a tight space and the ball's in the air, for the vast majority of the time, they're going to lose that. Understandably, it's and again, they're being asked to do something that's probably impossible given their physical profile. Outside of that, his kind of defensive statistics are, as a shout out to my wife, más o menos. Here or there, plus or minus, not really a differentiator between the two. And I think some of that is role dependent. As Alan said, we've shifted how we're pressing a little bit, I think, this year. and the movement of Hatate up top, and we're not being as militantly front-footed in high pressing like goalkeepers, and we're kind of more frequently we're allowing keepers and center backs to kind of have the ball and then doing pressing traps. So within that context, it would make sense that you might have some volume decline in just sheer number of pressures, for example, because they're not chasing around as much as they were. And again, these are on the margins. I'm not talking about huge material shifts. So, but yeah, neither one of them are in the neighborhood of Maeda, or few people are, but they're pretty close, other than that aerial aspect.
Yeah, I think, from my point of view, really, looking at, I know we've had discussions in the past with the likes of O and Giacomakis. What heartens me a great deal about Idah is that the manager really wanted him, and Brendan really sees something in him that he can work with. He also had that bit of, I think, as you mentioned before, Alan, but the stardust quality where he managed these big goals in big matches, important matches. So he is still pretty young. He still does have an awful lot of development, and I think sometimes it goes against him with the price tag, similar to Engels with some people, perhaps, with these young players. They see that what is big money for us, and sometimes that goes against them a little bit. Guys, if we're okay to move on just now, we'd asked for some questions from our viewers and listeners, and one of my earliest podcast with you, I mentioned this was very much the Thinking Fans podcast. Goodness me, the quality of questions, absolutely terrific, I thought. So if we're happy to start answering a few of these, but I'll start off with one for you, James, because there was one which was asking about you specifically, and how you came to be a Celtic fan.
Yeah, well, I think I've shared parts of this or most of it before, but I'll do the brief summary for people that have had to endure it before. So I grew up fairly isolated from my family in Scotland. Resources were not there to be making frequent trips back to the UK, and we never were able to field family members visiting us. And so my uncle was the first to really start to come regularly in the late 90s. And he and I got to be quite close. And he was a huge Celtic supporter. And that was something that we started to commiserate over each summer when he would come in for 2 to 3 weeks. And then when I went back in 2004, my wife and I lived with my aunt and uncle for 6 weeks in Clydebank, and got to attend my first game, which was a derby against Rangers, and I think it was a quarterfinal. Somebody corrected me on that at one point. I think it was a quarterfinal that Larson scored in 1-0. And then I was hooked, going to a game live and just experiencing that. And then from my life circumstances and technology shifted. So I would say my daily consumption of Celtic started kicking in around 2014-15. Dyla, unfortunately, was in his first season, and so that was basically the origin story arc, and how it evolved.
Super, thanks very much. That was from Stephen Cairn, so I hope that answers your question. I thought it did, Stephen. Some of the others that come up here, some really quite interesting ones. I liked this as well, because it brings in a lot of different aspects of the pool of players, etc., that we have. And I'll put this one to you, please, Alan. If you could only sign one player, which position would you choose to strengthen? And if you wanted to drop a name in or two, that's fine. That's from HBK67.
Yeah, it's okay. So just one then. So
why is it? What's his name? The 17-year-old winger from Barcelona. What's his name? Yamal or?
Yeah, Lamine Yamal.
He wouldn't get a game for us though. No way.
Yeah, let's pretend we're a Rangers podcast. That will you learn, Lamal. You'll want to sign for the famous, won't you? No, listen. If I had to sign one position, right, it would be it would. So when Roger, one of the things that I quite enjoyed, not everybody did, when Rogers was first here. Remember that January where he brought in Timo Way and Oliver Burke, and they were kind of I call them hybrid forwards, as in they could literally you could put them anywhere across the front three and they'd do a job. And actually, it just completely reinvigorated the Celtic attack. And I know people, still remember Oliver Burke and some of his misses and some of his attempts to control the ball, but actually, he made a contribution to the team that season. And Timo Way was obviously a quality player. I think don't know if he's still at Juventus, but he was at one point. So I would actually like Rodgers to sort of to go back to those kind of hybrid forward days and bring in. If I had to bring in one player, it would be a hybrid forward, somebody with a bit of pace who can play anywhere across the front three. Because that's the area that I worry about. We just don't have the depth and the drop off between the front three who are all doing amazing. 40 over 40 scoring contributions from the front three so far this season. You're on target for like 120. That would be amazing between the three of them over the season if they continue at the current rate. So, but behind that, then I think we're a bit light. So that would be one player. It would be a kind of hybrid forward.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we could go for different positions. It's just a shame we missed out on Connor Barron, isn't it? Because he's lighting up the league, and I'm sure Juventus and all these sort of teams will be looking at him if you read the mainstream media. James, what's your thoughts?
I'll make it simple. I echo what Alan said. If you put a gun to my head and said you have to pick a second one, it would, despite us continuously signing 1 million of them, it would be a midfielder, just the right kind of midfielder.
Well, that brings us on nicely because a lot of people came up with very similar questions, really, and I would normally come to you, Alan, at this point, but it behoves me to go to James because of his love for this young man. There was a few questions about Lennon Miller. So firstly, and I think I know the answer to this, James, should we sign Lennon Miller?
I mean, I would be thrilled if we did. Yeah. I think, should's a kind of a loaded word. Whether we can is interesting. The rumor that I saw today was 4 million, and if that's the number, then we should tip them 1 million for thank you for being so gullible to sell him for 4 million. I can't imagine that that's the number. Hopefully it is. I mean, that would be wonderful.
Imagine there must be major add-ons to something like that as well.
Even
given Celtic, moving players on.
But based off of his age profile, how well he's doing, even though it's in Scotland, the way the market has moved to revalue young players, I would just be stunned if we got him for that price. Again, I'd love it if we did. And if his support network and he sees Celtic as, a good platform for him to take the next steps in his career, that would all be terrific. There'd be no bigger fan than I of making that signing. I disagree with the expert opinion of Andy Walker. I think that if we did sign him, he should, I would think within relatively short order, given the quality I think he has, even at his age, I think he would work his way into the starting lineup. Yeah. The question would be who he displaces in my mind. I suspect it wouldn't be Callum McGregor because he is the captain and still a very good player. So then it becomes, who would he displace on a game-to-game basis? Obviously, none of this matters until theoretically, if it were to happen in January, in the winter window. And a move like that, normally, unless he's going to be loaned right back to Motherwell. I mean, Motherwell's theoretically and I think reasonably going to be competing for a place in Europe, or at least they're probably going to think they could by then. So for them to sell him outright in January, and that we would disrupt our squad at that point. And you know what I mean? Like, it seems more like a summer move if he were to come to Celtic. Even if they paid for him in January, my guess is he would stay at Motherwell. But that's me completely speculating. I mean, that's who knows? But yeah, I'd be a huge fan.
Yeah, I think so. Just before I come to you, Alan, to ask a little bit more about Lennon Miller, I think the point you make there is a good one in terms of would Motherwell do the deal, James, and it's no secret that they really need the money. There's no two ways about that, and I think the idea of maybe buying them before some of the big guns act. If I go back to, things like, goodness me, the John McGinn situation where we just kept seeming to go on and on, we eventually lose out. It'd be wonderful to act quickly here. And if it suits Motherwell, give the boy time to develop there, keep playing regularly. We can wait, we can get in there, get the deal done. And as you say, Motherwell's in a good position at the moment. They've already had a good cup run as well. They may well want him for the Scottish Cup and so forth. And let's be honest as well, we talked before about how we wanted the Scottish League to be ultra competitive, and if the more strong teams that we have, the better. And if he was to wait until the end of the season, I think that would be fine from my point of view. Alan, to pick up a little bit on what James was saying there, about who would he displace, I suppose it's two parts to this really. Who would he be competing with in the team? Should we sign him? And also, what's your feeling on? It's very much connected. Where would you play him ideally? Because you can play in a variety of different positions.
Yeah, I mean, I think at 18, it's not a closed discussion really in terms of where could he fit into that midfield. If I was who was to join the cadre of central midfielders that we have, then if I was going to sort of, have an apprentice, if you like, to Callum McGregor, I would probably be looking at Paulo Bernardo to play that role. I think that would be his optimal role. So therefore, I would, and I don't see him. I think he probably could be trained to be a number 10, but we don't really play an out and out 10, and I think that'd almost be a little bit of a waste. I think he looks to me like he plays on the right of a 3, mainly on the right of a 3 for Motherwell, and I would see him as really competing for one of those sort of number 8 positions. So really with Hatate, Engels, McCowan. I would like to see Bernardo maybe take McGregor's place for a few games and rotate the captain out, which I know we'll get to McGregor in one of the later questions. So yeah, I wouldn't be loaning him back to Motherwell. I would say he's good enough to compete for a spot at Celtic. Even if he's coming on getting 20 minutes, he'll still get enough 90 minutes under his belt. His attacking, it's very difficult looking at, again, one of the reasons I collect my own data for Celtic is because I mainly compare Celtic players to other Celtic players. Because if you look at like a StatsBomb or a Y-Scout and you do a comparison of a Motherwell player to a Celtic player, the sheer gulf in the standings of the teams and the performance of the teams means that at the player level, it just kind of distorts even good players. They just get distorted by the gulf in the teams that they play for. So comparing Lennon Miller to Engels, as I've just done on StatsBomb, he's actually a bit closer than you'd think. But Engels still trumps him on virtually all metrics, especially the defensive ones. But again, I don't know what Motherwell's expectations are and instructions are on Miller in terms of his pressing strategies, how much he's expected to track back. But certainly the defensive part of the game is his weakest at Motherwell. That's not to say he couldn't do the job. I just don't know, because it all depends on what the instructions are. But certainly in terms of the attacking side of the game, his overall passing, his progressions from deep, his assisting ability, his even his goal threat are all kind of up there in a mediocre team, and he's an 18-year-old. So that all says to me there's just massive, and physically, he's a bit of a specimen, right? I don't know how tall he is, but he looks like a big lad. The only one little thing I would say is I suspect if he came to Celtic, he'd probably get a little bit leaner. I don't want to be disrespectful to Mother, but I think we'd probably make him a bit leaner, and therefore we might see a little bit more speed in his play. He doesn't strike me as being the quickest, but again, I don't know that that's been. I'm not sure I've seen enough to be definitive about that. It's just that if I was to be analytical and think of what might be the issues or what might be the concerns, that would just be one in my mind. Especially as I don't think Engels is top end speed, Bernardo's not really top end speed, so we just need to be careful we don't have too many kind of mid range players in terms of the speed across the ground department in that part of the team. So, but yeah, otherwise it's definitely a yes from me. It's put him in the first team squad. It's probably play him as a number 8 and let him compete in that position.
And I think again, when you look at what Brendan Rodgers has done historically with young players and their development, it's quite exciting if you were to sign a player of that quality. And hopefully that would also come into the equation, with his, his decision and his team's decision about where he ends up going. Callum McGregor get brought into the discussion there, and I thought it was a really good question from Paul Smith, Paul 1888. We had talked, some weeks ago about Callum and his age profile, fitness and all the rest of it as the years go past. I'll come to both of you in this, but if I start off maybe with you, please, James. Have you seen any adjustments that Callum has made in his play, or the way that maybe Brendan's using Callum? And if so, is this compromise just going to mean that he can play longer but maybe be less effective? What's your views? Have you seen many changes?
I haven't seen. Most of the changes have been more systemic, and I think he's probably doing less. I'll call it the headless chicken issue that we've had in our midfield at times historically. So he seems to be on the margin a little more anchored in that kind of central space, which is fine with me. Like I think, when you're playing 4-3-3, you get all these dynamic patterns of play and rotations, and we're always talking about, and some of this I'm saying also within the context of Europe, where I think this is most material and most important. And so I think, that's taken place on the margin. But other than that, I mean, he's slowing down a little bit, which again is normal. But I think he's still being relatively smart about it. I would say, and I'll have to, Alan will know this, he'll have the stats up, but I'd say probably he's been a little looser with the ball this season. And I'm just going off of my sense on that. Maybe a couple of, poorly placed passes in bad spots. Whereas historically, he's been, almost, extremely secure on the ball in that build-up phase. So like turnover, error rate, that kind of thing. But, and again, that could be a one-off here or there. I mean, we're talking small sample size. So yeah, I don't think we're at the level yet where we have to be concerned. But as we head into next season, I think it should be a serious conversation, because we're already, that's what, historical aging curves. Again, the club should have that kind of information. And all I can go off of is with the public stuff. And I think his peak speed in the Champions League has been sub 29 kilometers per hour, which is very low. I mean, that's on the low end for Champions League level midfielders. That's you're talking old guys or ball playing, creative, Pirlo deep guys like Gross from Dortmund, that kind of thing. And as much as I love McGregor, he's not that. He's not a deep lying creative force. Like he's very good at moving the ball on, and he'll pull out some, through balls and balls over the top at time, but that's not his, like, he's okay in that regard, but that's not a standout strength of his. So I do think it's something, particularly for next season, that I'd be more concerned with if there's not a plan to manage, whether it's through system, structure, formation, putting someone next to him, that kind of thing. If there's a strategic plan that says he's starting every game next year, then I think that needs to be managed much more smartly than what had gone on with Scott Brown, for example.
Yeah, I was thinking of Scott Brown actually as you were talking there. James, you mentioned something there that I'll be coming back to after we get Alan's point of view. There's a question come up about Champions League. We'll move on to that in a moment. Alan, do you agree really with James in terms of it's more systemic the way that Callum's playing, and rather than trying to make up for maybe some frailties and so forth? And if so, do you think the system suits him?
Yeah, I mean, he's an intelligent footballer. So I think,
Yeah.
the big change this season for McGregor is, there's about 10 weeks of the season where he won't be travelling, he won't be training with Scotland, he won't be playing high-pressure international matches where he's likely to be against the ball most of the game, not with the ball. So that is massive. I mean, that is someone mathematically minded could come up with a number for how much strain he's not going to put his body under through that 10 weeks of the season that he's not going to be travelling with Scotland. So that's a plus. So I think we've already seen a dividend of that to some extent. So let me expand on that. So I developed, again, a framework for evaluating McGregor. I wrote it up in the Celtic way last season, and I've added this season's data to that view, and it's quite interesting. Okay, it is quite interesting. So the way I would characterise it is that his defensive activity is probably less volume, but a better quality. So he's actually his defensive action success is actually the highest rate it's ever been, and his possessions won from defensive actions is only beaten by the 22-23 season. But his volume of defensive activity has gone down. So that's a kind of smart player. Who's, as James says, perhaps a little bit more anchored to that central midfield role, not necessarily running around flying into tackles, but he's timing his interventions well, he's positioning himself well, and that's coming out in more quality, less volume, which I love to see. Work smarter, not harder. Where I think also the one surprising thing to James's point is he's actually carrying the ball more. Now that's a real surprise because again, you don't expect an older player to be carrying the ball more. To James's point, he's carrying the ball more, but he's not carrying it at a greater speed. He's carrying it at a slower speed, but he is carrying the ball a little bit more, and that may well mitigate to some extent some of the lack of pack passing that we're seeing from his midfield compatriots. But again, his peak ball progression was actually the 2021 season, and he's kind of nestled in terms of carries, ball carries. He's kind of second only to that one season on ball carries. His pack passing has kind of improved on last season. Last season was his least productive in terms of ball progression. This season, he's kind of jumped to being like the second most productive. So that's quite a surprise. But I think this is part of the dividend again of that additional rest time. Where I think we're seeing a big drop off is just in raw creativity, as in actually to James's point, he's not getting into the final third. So I've got two things that evidence that. One is from StatsBomb, and it's called deep progression. So this is how many times does he either carry or pass the ball into the final third of the pitch, and that has just been going down every single season. So the peak was the 2021 season, where he averaged 12 of these deep progressions a game, and we're now down to half, but just over half that, 6.76. But the trend is definitely down. And similarly, if we look at expected assists and number of chances created, so again, volume of chances created and quality of chances created, this is the lowest season that he's ever had. So he's not getting into the final third, and he's not creating them, therefore. Ergo, he's not creating as many chances. So that again backs up what James says about he's anchoring the midfield more, where he's doing a stellar job, but he's carrying the ball and probably giving it to others to get it into the final third. So that suggests a slight tweak in role. His pressing numbers have actually gone up, believe it or not. Again, a little bit surprising maybe to some, but again, that's a systemic thing. That's a Rodgers and the way he wants the team to play. Now, it's not massive. I mean, he's putting 9.12 pressures on per game. It was 8.7 last season, but 9.12, that was steadily going down. That was going down and down and down. And this season, it's gone up a bit. His number of regains has gone up to be the third best it's ever been. So, it's just a small increase, but it's just a little bit of reversion of that age decline. And again, I think we can attribute that to the retirement from international duty. And then finally, not finally, second last thing is just goal threat. So again, that's kind of gone down as well. Yes, he scored 5. In fact, I think he's the joint top scorer in the Premier League, but he scored 5 goals from outside the box, right? This is just classic, massive overperformance. If you add up the XG of the shots that he scored from,
He's
it
still
wouldn't even reach
developing, Alan.
it wouldn't reach one goal. It wouldn't even reach half a goal, right? So to 5 goals is remarkable. It's not going to continue. I hope it does. Call me back if it does. I'll be delighted, right? So we've already talked about him not getting into the final third as much, so we don't expect his XG to be going up. So the last thing that I'll cover, because again I'll probably write this in the Celtic away again, because I'm using a lot of what I've used here is StatsBomb data. Okay, so I can't use that on the huddlebreakdown.com. It needs to go on to because they Celtic Way pay for the StatsBomb data. The last thing I'll mention is their on ball value metrics. This is the aggregate of all on ball actions. So it's a bit abstract, but it's kind of intuitive in terms of how your actions basically help either score a goal or concede a goal. That's pretty intuitive in that sense, even if it does look a bit and sound a bit abstract. Anyway, long story short, his on-ball value is jumped up to 0.4. So that is, again, what does that mean in terms of a number? My screen is frozen. 0.4 OBV. That's as high as it was in 22-23. His highest ever was the 1920 season. It was 0.29. So it's actually the third highest it's been. Actually, no, it was 0.3 in 18-19. So basically, he's gone back to sort of 2 years ago in terms of his overall contribution to the team, as StatsBomb would drill it down into one piece of data. So that's a mixed bag. But the conclusion of all of that, and James probably put it a lot more succinctly than I did, is he's a lot more anchored in that midfield. He's a lot smarter about his positioning. He's actually doing more pressing, and he's winning the ball back more. His defensive actions are more successful, not necessarily through working hard, just by being smart. He's carrying the ball a little bit more, but from deeper areas. So he's probably less buffeting and so forth. So the fact that he's running a bit slower, not as much of an impact, and his final third contributions in general were pretty much collapsing. But his overall contribution to the team is holding his end up. And that's really, I think, when someone gets into the 30s, holding their end up to a level that 2 years ago was very high, I think is a win, right? So I think we take that as a win. But I echo what James said. We desperately need to be planning for life. A gradual decline in McGregor's contributions just through natural age grading. And as I say, my vote would be, to sort of apprentice Bernardo in that role.
Penultimate question. I'll put this one over to you, please, James. So, Mad Sweeney, hail, asked, do you think Brendan Rodgers will get a wandering eye given his success at the club domestically and in Europe at the moment? And do you think that he'll attract attention from elsewhere?
Oh, given the conveyor belt of managerial turnover, I don't doubt at some point his name will be floated amongst the chattering class, particularly if the Champions League progresses as we all hope it will. I would be stunned if he were not to at least see out his contract as it's signed from when he came back. The whole point of him coming back was not to do that. I think. I mean, and I take him at his word. I mean, I think we can all have good faith, honest disagreements on strategic issues and structure of the club and, all of these things. But I think he really does care about the club. I think he really wants to help build the club for the future and help take the club to that next level in Europe. Like I think that's actually why he came back. So I'd be stunned if he doesn't at least see out next season, I guess would be his initial contract. And it wouldn't surprise me if, he's here longer than that. Particularly if things are progressing as we all hope they will. So yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very much, about redemption and legacy. When he comes back, it would seem bizarre if turn people against him even more. Just when he's won pretty much everybody back, those who did doubt him. I saw you nodding away there, Alan. So I won't come to you on that one unless I've got that dreadfully wrong. So Alan, the last question, but I will come to you on that as well, James. This was from Rio Roger, and wonder if that's Brendan's
burner. He gets his burner
yeah,
account.
I bet he listens in, doesn't he? Definitely does. So Rio Roger said, is a champ, he's kind of looking at how many points. I think he's dreaming
he's getting
of getting
greedy.
19 points. Yeah.
These a-holes are getting greedy all of a sudden.
He's a dreamer, and I'm going to come to that in a moment. Not having don't you dare have a go at that guy. So, looking at possibly 19 points, but, a Champions League top 8 finish, I would be happy with that. Is that as far as we go? Can we start looking towards a big scalp in the knockouts? Can we take on and defeat one of the big names over 2 legs, Alan?
So it's not Rio Roger on X is one of these people that always lovely to interact with. It's always a good experience. So absolutely no harm there. And
thank you, Brendan, for being nice.
No, seriously. Absolutely, one of these good accounts. It's always positive, always a good interaction. So listen, I'm a worrier, right? So I see jeopardy in all of these Champions League ties. Whether it's home to Bruges, away to Zagreb, home to Young Boys, away to Villa. I see jeopardy in all of those things. But I also see a Celtic team that continues to be well coached, well motivated, together as a unit. Some of the parts, greater, and on all that, all the things you need to have a good team. And if you've got a good team, if you've got a plan, you've got a way of playing, you've got decent players in it, you've got a bit of luck, you've got all those things. If they're in your favour, and you tend to get more luck, the more organised you are, the better, the more coherent the way your way of playing is, etc. We've start to see Schmeichel start to kind of show his qualities in the last couple of weeks as well. All of those things are positive. The things I would worry about are some of the areas where the squad depth just isn't there. If I think Scales and Trusty have done really well. Carter Vickers is clearly a worry in terms of his ongoing fitness issues. The drop off at right back is probably a bit. And I've talked about the wing positions, the forward positions, and not enough depth there. And we've talked about the variability of performance in the central midfields. Engels, Bernardo, Hitati especially, their performance levels oscillate a little bit more wildly than I would like. I'd like to see a greater degree of consistency, but they're all relatively young players, and I think that will come. So those are the kind of slight concerns. And you have an off day against a Zagreb, and you'll lose. It's as simple as that, right? But all that being said, the next 3 games: Bruges at home, Zagreb away, Young Boys at home. There is a realistic chance of taking 9 points from those games. There is a chance. The way Celtic are playing, there is a chance, and that would take us up to. I don't know how many points would that be.
It's 7 now, right?
16 points. Yeah, 16 points, and you've actually got a fighting chance then of being, if not in the top 8, in the sort of maybe the top 6 of the next 6 down kind of thing. And then that means you're going to be playing a team that's in the 20th position, which might be Atletico Madrid.
Right, I was going to say the way this is shaping up. What the hell?
It could be Paris Saint-Germain, right? You could get really unlucky. So listen, you take what you take if you get through. We just got to get through. The chances of us not getting through statistically are quite low, I believe, based on the Opta models and things that I've seen. So, but nothing. We should take nothing for granted. We're going to have to be at the top of our game to beat a well-organised team like Bruges. Same in Zagreb. The Croatian sides are it's always fantastic. It doesn't matter who they are.
They're on 7 points as well at the moment, Zagreb.
Yeah. Young Boys Burn seem to be having a lot of trouble, but they've got a new manager and they are climbing up the league, so they'll probably be better than they were early in the competition. And Aston Villa away, could be something, it could be nothing. I mean, they could be already through. They could be fighting to get into the top eight. It could, and they're a bit hot and cold actually at the moment
Yeah.
when it comes to their form. So I think I wouldn't be shocked if we managed to battle for something in that game as well. But we could get absolutely hammered as well. So I think this European season's been interesting. I mean, if you look at the Rangers games, I know they're not. I don't know they're playing a lower level of opposition, but they've been really competitive in those games. Hearts have been competitive in their games as well. So I think we shouldn't underestimate these teams, obviously, but actually maybe our clubs are a little bit better than what we think. And as I say, I would say this is the Celtic team's got a better chance than Ange's team had because of the balance of the way that the team play, because of the control that they're able to elicit, because of the maturity that we showed against Leipzig now, and Atalanta in terms of that balance between all-out pressing, keeping control of the ball, when to attack. It's not perfect. We need to see it over a number of games. As I've said before, it takes years to become a good Champions League team, right? It takes years, even really good clubs. I always go back to the Lyon example, the Lyon side of the early 2000s, an absolutely fantastic team. It took them years to get to sort of semi-final, quarter-final stage, right? That experience has to be ingrained in the players. But sorry, so I've spoken a lot there because there's a lot of conflicting things going on in my head. But I'm kind of quietly and cautiously optimistic that we might do quite well this season in Europe.
Sadly, you've triggered me again by mentioning that great Lyon team, and I've automatically drawn to Bobo Baldi's handball right at the death when I thought we'd managed to get through. So thanks for that, Alan. You've taken the vibe away from my poem now.
No.
James, did you have anything to add to what Alan was saying there?
Yeah, I'm probably more bifurcated than what it sounds like Alan is, meaning that I actually see a reasonable scenario where we only get one or maybe three. I mean, Young Boys is the obvious team that we should win against. But, let's say horrible and just a bad night and bad variance and we get a draw at home, something like that. Like I can see Zagreb, Villa, and Bruges all giving us like real headaches for various reasons. So I don't think we're out of the woods. And I think the risk is, and that's not my base case, by the way. It's like, I'm saying it's not a sliver. So that 16%, what is it? Whatever it is, it's 80% or something that we're going to be top 24 or something. Like it's a big number.
I think it's more than that.
Yeah, 90. It's high. It's really, really high. Whatever it is, I saw it. I was like, that sounds too high to me. So on a probabilistic basis, I think it's probably a little high. But and that's because I think, and the mood amongst the support, I think, is way beyond that. And that's, let's refresh that we had the weakest opposition statistically going into this, and I think to a large degree it's played out that way. And we caught a Leipzig team that is not playing well, and we talked about that going into it, despite their standing in the Bundesliga and how that was kind of masking some material underlying performance red flags that they've had. So I think when you add those things up, I'm really interested to see how we do against Bruges. To me, that's, I keep saying this, each game's like its own major test, but they're a peer group team. Their talent level is going to be right aligned with us. They've got a good old keeper. We've got a good old keeper. But I think they're going to be smart. They're a really smart run club. So I think they'll come in with probably a good game plan and stress test some of our weaknesses. Whereas I don't think Leipzig necessarily did that. And, Bratislava was a total train wreck. So, so I think we're going to get tested in a way against Bruges that we haven't so far against any other team, meaning that they're going to come more likely to come in with a smart game plan. So if we can beat Bruges, then all of this channel, obviously the statistical aspect is that'll basically secure us top 24. But as far as dreaming, right, and that's what we're talking about here, if we can go in and have a proficient sound victory over Bruges, meaning not only do we win, but it's a good underlying performance and controlled performance, then that'll open me up to dream a lot more, because I think they're a threshold club in this campaign in that way.
Thanks very much. You really keyed me up nicely there. That was like a Matt O'Reilly slide rule pass, James, for the poem. So thanks so much with all your talk of dreams. I think the Bruges game, I've always thought that's going to be the key. So I couldn't agree more. That'll be a really exciting game. So to end with my choice of poem, well, as a Celtic fan, our songs are littered with reference to dreams and songs to sing. Though your dreams be tossed and blown and all the rest of it. James, you may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I chose a poem called Dreams by a guy called Langston Hughes. If you're not aware of him, he wrote in the 1920s. He was part of the Harlem Renaissance, an African-American poet at a time when it was never been easy, but incredibly tough to be an African-American at that particular time, in that particular area. Lot of working class content, and so I felt this was especially poignant in this particular poem. I've always loved it, and from the Celtic fan point of view, with Europe ahead of us, a cup final ahead of us, a potentially unbeaten invincible season ahead of us, it's all there, folks, at this particular moment in time. We have to dream, guys. Okay, so Dreams by Langston Hughes. Hold fast to dreams, for if dreams die, life is a broken winged bird that cannot fly. Hold fast to dreams, for when dreams go, life is a barren field, frozen with snow. As we approach winter, my friends, let's hold on to those dreams. Thank you so much. Now, Alan, over to you.
Yeah, thank you for that. That was lovely, and especially the winter image as well. So, listen, as winter does approach, right? So, on the huddle.com, huddlebreakdown.com, sorry, and on the YouTube channel, our YouTube channel as well, there's a short video just explaining that over the next week we're going to be switching on the subscription services that we've teed up, explaining all the different features that you'll get. But if you go to huddlebreakdown.com, you'll see on the website all of the different sections. You've got the full Celtic by Numbers archive. On the YouTube channel still, you can get all the archive of all of the podcasts as well, all the written content that's there. Almost every day we're producing a new either article or podcast, and that will continue. There's also an article on the huddlebreakdown.com called Welcome to the Huddle Breakdown 2.0, and that kind of goes through what we're doing, why we're doing it, and also it gives you a flavour for what the tiers are in terms of the different options that you can select. It is important to say that the Tuesday podcast that we record, it comes out on a Wednesday with Laura, which was basically the one that we've essentially the flagship one, if you like, the one that we've been doing for 4 years. That, and then the weekly, or every time there's a match week in the league, Yorkshire Whistler provides his input into the key decisions. Those two pieces of content will continue and always will be free for everyone if you so wish. But we do hope that you like this regular pod. We do hope you like all of the other written content, and that you feel there's value in there for you, and that you will support the channel with a subscription, and that will help us to make more hopefully good content. So as I say, huddlebreakdown.com, all the information's on there in articles and on the latest pod. And thank you ever so much so far for all your support, amazing kind feedback that we generally get on those things. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Alan, and thanks everyone for joining James, Alan and myself again this week. Do please remember to like and subscribe on whichever platform you're watching or listening on, and do join us again next week. And as we've said, Laura, James and Alan will have a show out probably about Wednesday. They'll be recording on the Tuesday. So hope you all have a fantastic weekend, and thanks again. Goodbye.